So what do expatriate Scots make of it all? Yesterday we heard the argument for the no vote.
Today we're joined by Gordon Rennie, a Scotsman who now lives in Melbourne, who is a supporter of Scottish independence. Gordon Rennie, thanks for joining us. I understand you did want Scotland to remain part of the UK, but during this debate you've changed your mind. How come?
Yes, that's right. Look, I've always been pro the Union, pro Scotland being part of Great Britain. I lived in London for many years. But when the referendum was announced, I decided to, initially read the white paper and see whether it was credible and then do some research. And over that time period, I realised there are many reasons and many positive reasons why Scotland would be a very successful small country. So over the time period, I turned to the yes position, and the more research I've done, the more confident I am that that's the best outcome for prosperous Scotland.
But Gordon, it seems the finance industry has been the most vocal opponent of this over the last couple of weeks, with the realisation that a yes vote could get up. There was a Deutsche report that's come out just in the last 24 hours, I think, and some people saying that this could send Scotland through the economic trapdoor or something like that. What do you make of these financial arguments?
Look, there's a really great report written by Credit Suisse, a Swiss investment bank. It's called The Success of Small Nations, and what it says is that the single largest determinant factor for a successful country is that it's small, that it's prosperous, that it's got good governance, that it's got good natural resources and a strong energy sector, for example, and Scotland meets all those criteria for being a very successful nation. The reality is that as part of the UK, it's not being particularly successful, and then the UK doesn't do well on all those criteria. And I think one of the great opportunities that presents itself to Scotland is to strike out on its own and become a successful small country, a country maybe like Norway or Switzerland or Austria, maybe even Australia. And I think that's something that Scotland doesn't have at the moment. It doesn't do particularly well on a range of success measures, be that standard of living, health outcomes, average wages, nor does the UK. And I'd like to think that in a post-independence era, Scotland would be able to rise through those ranking tables and be as successful as our peer small nations around the world.
But what do you think these financial institutions are motivated by? Because they've got some pretty dire predictions about what could happen for the Scottish economy.
And I think that's been the sole driver of the No campaign. It's scaremongering, negativity, what could happen. And I think that's one of the reasons so many Scottish people have moved to the Yes campaign, is it's a positive vision for the future of Scotland. I note that this week there was doom and gloom in the papers around the Royal Bank of Scotland and HBOS moving their headquarters to London. Now, what's transpired is that they won't be moving their headquarters to London, despite that being what's covered in the press. They'll move their registered address, the brass plaque that's on the wall. In fact, Lloyds and HBOS already have that registered address in London. And none of the head office jobs, none of the economic output, none of the services, the banking services provided to Scottish people will move. So I think it's a lot of scaremongering, and I think that's been the only way that the No campaign have been able to campaign, is the what might happen, the negativity. And I think Scots people are really excited about an alternative to that, which is a positive, progressive vision for what Scotland could be if it was independent.
Can you name a time or an event that really kick-started the push for an independent Scotland?
Look, I think it's always been there. I can't speak to the rest of the country. For me personally, I took the festive season probably December, January to read the white paper. For me, that was probably the starting point of when I realised that independence was credible and also a better alternative to what we have now. I think independence has always been kind of bubbling along in the background. I think successive governments of potentially Conservative governments or even Labour governments have made such a series of bad decisions that have eroded the kind of social fabric of the UK to the point where our wages are low, our standards of living are poor by comparison to others, that eventually the Scottish people just realised that maybe they can do it more effectively themselves. And I think that's a big driver for why the Yes campaign has had so much momentum in the last 3 or 4 months, and why the election is really too close to call.
So Gordon, do you get a vote yourself? Are there heaps of Scots here in Australia who will be taking part in the process somehow?
I don't. So one of the principles of the election is that you have to be a resident of Scotland. So as somebody who lives in Australia, or even Scots people living in England, for example, they don't get to vote.
Ripped off.
Totally ripped off. I think I agree with the principle. I think the people who are best placed to decide Scotland's future are the people that live there. But one of the reasons, and people say this to me a lot, oh, you know, you don't get to vote. What is it to you? And it's true, I don't get to vote. But as a Scot who lives overseas, I do think an awful lot about would I want to go back and live in Scotland, and I wouldn't at the moment. And I think that's a sad thing. And I'd like to think that an independent Scotland would be somewhere that I would want to take my family back to, and where I would want to go and live. And I think that's the vision that a lot of Scottish people are moving to, and that's the potential that Scotland has to make itself a better nation, independent from Westminster politics.
Just briefly, Gordon, yesterday we learned that this discussion over the referendum is splitting families straight down the middle. In fact, there have been some pretty nasty arguments apparently around the dinner table at night discussing what our future Scotland should look like. What does your family make of it all?
I'd say my family are probably split as well. I don't pry into how they will vote. I think lots of families will have people voting both sides of the referendum. I don't think there's any real animosity or violence or aggression or anything. I think Scottish are passionate people, and I think what's been absolutely wonderful about this referendum is the level of engagement that Scottish people have had with the future of their country. Typically in a British general election, maybe 61% of the population would vote. 90% of the Scottish population have registered to vote, and some of the predictions are saying that it could be 85% of the people who turn out to vote. That's an unprecedented situation, and just goes to show that the previous position of British politics was not one that people engaged with, whereas what's happening now is a positive vision that's been painted for the future of Scotland, is energising the people of the nation and getting them out to vote, and that's a wonderful thing. It might lead to the occasional dinner table debate, but I think it's a good thing for British politics and a great thing for Scottish politics.
Well, hopefully those who don't get what they want can take out their frustration in a Highland Games event or something like that, rather than getting stuck into each other over the dinner table.
I hope so.
We'll leave it there. Gordon Rennie, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.